In 20th century U.S. history, we characterize decades by highlighting the most dynamic and memorable themes: the Roaring 20s, the Depression-era 30s, the fabulous baby boom 50s, the conservative 80s. The periods are defined as unique and distinct, and references to them elicit social, political, and cultural symbols. Just think of the 1960s. But what to make of the 70s? The decade has long had a bad rap, and understandably so. Other than being between the 60s and 80s, what is it even known for? The first history book written about the 70s was even titled, "It Seemed Like Nothing Happened." But of course, that's not quite true. Perhaps we've suppressed our reflections of the 70s, not because nothing happened, but rather because things we prefer to forget happened. Malaise overtook the nation as Americans seemed to be caught in a nightmare loop. Economic crises, a flagging global standing, an acute energy crisis, and a full-blown disaster in the American presidency. Americans had bumper stickers on their cars that declared, "Don't vote, it only encourages them," or "Impeach someone." We weren't just mad at authority, but also at each other. That's reflected in fiery and angry debates about affirmative action, busing, abortion rights, ERA, the Native American occupation at Wounded Knee, the battle of the sexes, won by Billie Jean King, and even unprecedented divorce rates. Is it that surprising that Americans were buying pet rocks for $3.95, rocks that just sat there and did nothing but make their creator $15 million? But now, half a century later, we recognize that for better or for worse, the 70s transformed American political, economic, and cultural life as much or even more than any other era. The nation's center of gravity shifts south and west as the booming economy and growing population of the Sun Belt begins to gain control over national politics. There's a renewed support for private enterprise and entrepreneurship as agents of progress and change. The basic ethic of personal liberation and satisfaction continue to characterize the culture. And there's a general skepticism for traditional authority and institutions, not just government, but medical, legal, religious, even academic. So while analysis of the 70s descends into lamentations, challenges were refining, assumptions were questioned, seeds were planted and nurtured for an American makeover that will reshape our cultural assumptions. Maybe we need to reconsider how we make sense of the worst of times, because perhaps crisis generates action and dislodges complacency. 70s Americans are caricatured as narcissists with little concern for the public good and who are only motivated by personal pleasure and fads. Yet for 8 nights in January 1977, Americans were engrossed in a television miniseries that captured the hearts and minds of more than half the American population and 85% of the nation's televisions. 100 million viewers tuned in for the finale of Roots, the story based on Alex Haley's family's lineage. He traced his ancestors to Gambia, followed their capture and horrific journey across the Middle Passage to Maryland, where they survived the tragedies of enslavement. Americans were gripped. The cultural impact of Roots was immediate, but mainly a previously taboo subject was discussed at bus stops, water coolers, and on the streets. Across race lines, across gender lines, through class and ethnic divisions. Urban, rural, north, south, east, west, all ages. The 70s is remembered for its crisis, despair, and acrimony. Yet for 1 week, most Americans were captivated by a distinctly American and human story of tragedy, determination, commitment, resistance, resilience, and survival. And together, Americans began to see who their nation was, and even who they were, a little bit differently.